Okay, hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm here this afternoon with Boyd Cohen from Iomob, very interesting company that we're going to find more about now. I'm here as the Connected Mobility Hub. I run investor relations for the Connected Mobility Hub. I know it says Startup Lab Spain in both places, but that's because we're collaborating during July and through into the beginning of September on this year's Connected Mobility Hub investor event, which is where we invite 20 of our associated members. There are over 150 members now from across Europe. So out of those 150 odd, we invite 20 of them to present their decks to our investor community, which is about 300 investors in total. And I've got no idea how many are going to sign up. This year at the moment, we've got about 70, but almost none of the ones that signed up for previous years have signed up for this year, I guess, because we tend to do it in person. And so we, this year, because it's online, well, people are coming from places where they hadn't come before. So anyway, we start on the 8th. We have a pitching session by logistics, I believe. Then we do the 15th, 22nd, and 29th of different sub-verticals. And then we do a networking session, again, also online at the beginning of September. And the idea is there's investor networking, and then there's investor startup networking and one-to-one meetings with an idea to sort of close down rounds that are being discussed during the summer. Let's see if that works. We're all here to try and raise money and support the ecosystem. So Boyd, after that rant, talk us through your who you are, where you come from, and what Iomob does, if you could.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I'm Boyd Cohen. I'm originally from the States. I'm based in Barcelona now. Been here 5 years. Iomob stands for Internet of Mobility. We have a big, bold, ambitious goal of creating a middleware layer of the internet whereby any vehicle, public, private, shared, can be connected to our middleware. And once it's connected, can be discovered, booked, and paid for and routed by any user of any app connected to the backend. On our journey, we focus primarily on offering an enterprise MaaS solution, mobility as a service, where our primary clients tend to be companies like Renfe, Spanish Rail. We have a new project in the UK with LNER, London Northeast Railway. We have a project in Sweden, really interesting, with a regional transit authority, Skåne Trafiken. We've done a project in New Zealand as well, and one in the US, a small one with Ford. We try to aggregate the mobility ecosystem and offer a seamless experience, combining all the public and private services, addressing a big UX problem that we currently find in the mobility marketplace with all the fragmentation that's out there.
Okay. Now, I understood that perfectly, but I know what Iomob does. And I would imagine that some of the people that are either watching this now or will watch it later probably don't 100% understand what you were trying to say. So I'm gonna do a very basic, probably very bad sort of user description. So I'm taking I'm living in the outskirts of, I don't know, you work in Sweden, right? I can't remember what the city is in Sweden. You work with it? There you go, Malmo. So I live on the outskirts of Malmo. I live, say, 15 minutes out of Malmo. I need to get to the train station from whatever village I'm in, get into Malmo center, and then I need to get to my office, which is 2 kilometers away from the train. So I go onto my Iomob app. I book let's say an Uber. The Uber, I'm not sure if you're integrated with Uber, are you?
No.
Okay, but there you go. Well, they should be integrated with you, because then this example would work perfectly. But I book my Uber. I go to it takes me to the train station. I get on the train. I get off the train. I lie. I don't book my Uber. I book my journey with Iomob. That journey books me an Uber that takes me to the train station, also pays for my train ticket into the center of Malmo, and then also has paid for my scooter, as you have behind you, that allows me to go to my office. All of it's been done within one app. all the payments have been done within one app, and you've also chosen the most the optimal route, or the optimal combination of mobility solutions to take me from origin to destination. Is that correct?
That is correct. There's a few things I'd like to refine from that narrative, which is, first of all, the seamless journey door to door is what you're referring to, that you can go between anywhere and anywhere and access all the mobility services. One thing is, we don't choose your optimal journey for you. We let you choose. We have different filters. You can choose fastest, cheapest, greenest. We're working on a new filter around social distance if you want to have a more safe journey with all the different modes. So we let you choose what your preferences are, and then our algorithms generate preferred optimal routes. So we think based on your preferences, you choose the route and you book and pay for them inside the platform. The only other thing I would mention is that you can't download Iomob as an app in the App Store, because we've chosen to deliver all of this technology to our clients, and our clients have apps. So, Renfe has their own app, and all these other clients that I already named have their own apps. And so what we do is integrate all this technology into their existing app. And most of our clients have existing apps for one type of service, like train or bus. What we do is give them their users this seamless journey you just described, but inside an existing app the user already has on their phone, so they don't have to download a new one.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah, that was what the white label bit was a very important point. And then why would a user take advantage of this? I mean, how many? Let's take the example of Malmo. I've got absolutely no idea. I've never been to Malmo. I've got no idea how many mobility solutions there are. You tell me, how many different mobility solutions, if not, would I have to contract with, install, and have payment facilities with to do that seamless journey?
You're hitting the nail on the head of why people are interested in MOS apps, because the mobility marketplace is extremely fragmented. Cities like Madrid and Barcelona, where a lot of us from the hub are based, have somewhere around 50 or 60 mobility services that each have their own app. So we're talking public transit, rail, different taxi apps, ride-hailing apps, micromobility apps, scooters, bikes, moped sharing. Each of them have their own app. Each of them require you to download and onboard and put your credit card in. And the problem is, even talking about Madrid and Barcelona is really funny, because you think, okay, well, you're in Spain, so it's not that big of a deal. If you travel between Madrid and Barcelona, surely almost every app you have in Barcelona is useful in Madrid, but that's totally not true. There's like 2 apps that are useful in both cities. All the rest of those 50 or 60 are not. There's not one scooter company. There are 22 scooter companies that offer scooter sharing, or did before COVID, in Madrid. Each had their own app. Not one of them was operational in Barcelona. So you think, oh yeah, I'm in Madrid, I've got 15 of these here, I'll find my services there. That's not true. So it's an incredibly fragmented market. It's crazy at a continental level. So the big ones in Asia are not even existing in Europe. But it's even crazy at a regional level, like Europe. Like, for example, Tier and Voy are really strong in Central Northern Europe. Bolt is very strong in Eastern Europe. Southern Europe, we have eCulture based in Spain, and some other big players. But there aren't very many that actually are, if you have one app, it goes with you across, even within Europe. And even in Spain, it doesn't work very well, as I just described. So this fragmentation is a real problem for users around the world as they move around their own city or other cities. So it's a problem. It's a big problem that's got to be solved. Juniper Research estimated that this year there's going to be 405 million euros in revenues for mobility as a service. And by 2027, so we're talking in 7 years' time, we're going to go from 405 million to $52 billion. It's dollars, not euros, in revenues for MOS. So it's big.
Yeah, it is big. It is big. And just before, I'm then going to jump across to COVID, and then we'll go on to the Connected Mobility app. But talking about COVID, you made a quick reference to this. I know that you launched a service which incorporated social distancing within the route parameters. Can you just talk about that a little bit, because it was a really interesting thing. You did it in the middle of the pandemic. You came up with this idea, said, okay, look, we're gonna do this, and you went for it. Can you just talk through it a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think we published a post talking about how we were embracing the idea of innovation, not hibernation, as a lot of investors were recommending. We just hibernate, get rid of staff, cut costs, and just survive. But I don't think many entrepreneurs think that way. We're always trying to figure out how we can innovate and have our technology be of service to humanity in whatever situation we're in. So we started thinking about how can moths react to COVID, and we initially came up with what you just described, which was a filter for social distance. So leveraging data we can get from different mobility suppliers, identifying which services adhere to social distancing guidelines, and then prioritize those services for the user in their optimal route if they choose the filter option of social distance. Since then, we've engaged with the marketplace and come up with two new features that are they're COVID and post-COVID, but they're highly related. So one is what we call virtual seat, which is the idea that for transit authorities and suburban rail operators who don't have a way to pre-sell seats with a seat map that can ensure social distance, they could create a virtual reservation system where they allocate a smaller percentage of total occupancy of the vehicles, and they allow them to be rented or booked in advance, where the user gets a QR code that they can scan depending on what kind of hardware is on the bus or the train or whatever, different ways of exposing that reservation as a way to try to reduce that anxiety people have about getting back into public transit if they have no idea how crowded it is. So that's one thing that we've developed. We also developed something similar to that called the Mobility Passport, which is the same idea but for multiple modes. Maybe you need to take a suburban rail line into a main transit hub, and then you want to take a bus from there. So you have two modes. You could have a Mobility Passport, one QR that works for both. And then the next thing we're working on right now, because of demand starting in the UK, but we're hearing from other markets too, we call it active mobility as a service. And it's about how all these cities are investing money in infrastructure to transform the urban environment to promote more active mobility. So they're creating corridors for active mobility, larger, wider space for social distance for biking and cycling and micromobility instead of dedicated car space. But that's just physical infrastructure. And a lot of these cities are assuming you build it, they will come, but maybe that doesn't happen. And if you don't add a digital layer that helps people figure out how to navigate, combining different types of modes of service and accessing micromobility for their first and last mile in the active travel corridors, then you won't get that uptake that they want. And then you might get cars coming back because the lobby will say, hey, you're not getting much use of the micromobility active space anyway, so let's go back to cars. So we're coming up with a new feature around how to support active mobility corridors.
Okay, the virtual seat one's an absolutely brilliant idea. It's very simple, but the best solutions tend to be, right?
Yeah.
And you picked on something. So yesterday I did an interview with Sonia Fernandez from Kiva Ventures, and I was asking her where, so they're an investor in Tier Mobility, for example, that we mentioned, and I was asking her what sectors she saw as being interesting for future sectors, and one of the most important points is that she focused on was data, and you've just mentioned data as well and making use of the data. I would imagine that that's a core value, particularly for probably local authorities, that you can provide them, right? And I think you were doing is this not somehow related to what you were doing in Sweden, in one of the cities?
Yeah, I mean, data is a big topic in mobility. Obviously, data privacy, because a lot of people want to have access to user data regarding their mobility patterns and everything. And to some level, that's incredibly valuable to a lot of people, a lot of stakeholders, including the public sector. But then there's a lot of concern about privacy, because should governments or private companies have access to where I move and how I move? So there's, and obviously with GDPR in Europe, that's always a topic of interest. And then you unpack data. Data is this generic category we talk a lot about, whether it's in smart cities or in smart mobility. And data is a very big topic. And there's a lot of aspects of what data, for who, how is it consumed, how is it shared, what's done with the aggregated information. So for us, the fundamental part of data is the data about the vehicle locations of the private and public services, so that we can transparently share all of this mobility ecosystem with a large user base, so that they can make the best decisions of how to go to A to B in the most efficient way possible. So that's one layer of data that I think, I was going to say most people agree with needs to be accessible, but that's not true. There are a lot of walled garden private mobility operators who want nothing to do with opening up their APIs so that third parties can aggregate and access their data. So that's one level. There's another level around user data, and then that's, of course, as I said, a very touchy subject regarding how much should we know about people and where they move. But there's another one, which is really your fundamental point around data and the public sector, which is, there's so limited data available to the public sector right now about aggregated mobility patterns of people. And you say, well, that's not true. Public transit authorities know everything about the volume of passengers that flow on public transit. Yeah, they do. Do they know how they got to public transit? Do they know if they used micromobility to get there or not? Do they know how many times people use an aggregation platform and they choose not to take public transit? And if they chose not to, what were the alternative options available to them? Do they know where there are gaps in the market? Because when people do searches for public service, they don't find anything meaningful, and they have to make 3 mode transfers to get to their destination instead of booking a taxi or something else. There's so much data that the cities don't have. We have this really cool heat map that our algorithms team has developed. I've never seen anyone do this before. You can put a point on a map, and the heat map will show how many parts of the map can you reach within 30 minutes using multiple modes. Because we're an aggregated open mobility marketplace, we have scooters, bikes, public transit, suburban rail, we have it all, right? So that means we can our algorithms can in real time calculate how long would it take, what's the fastest the user could get from this point to any other point on the map using any combination of service that's available in the city. That kind of data is incredibly valuable to the public sector, so they can think about how to make investments in public transit infrastructure. That kind of data, in my opinion, I think aggregators and MOS players like Iomob should by law be required to report that kind of aggregated, anonymized data to public transit authorities. That should be our license to operate MOS in the community. And guess what else I think? I think private services like scooter companies should be by law obligated to open their APIs, not their user data. Open their APIs so that any aggregator that meets some criteria can include their services in seamless multimodal journeys, and that should be their license to operate. So I think we have some room to go in making data available in ways that make mobility more efficient in cities.
No, I agree with that completely, and particularly in the current situation of greater public infrastructure spending and how to spend that in an optimal way. At the end of the day, the better we spend every euro, every dollar of taxpayers' money, the better it is for society generally. Apart from you get a better return on your cash, you're doing it in a better way for people's future use, rather than basing it on assumptions which aren't perhaps isn't really the best way of doing things in a world of data and big data and machine learning and all the rest of it. Agreed. Okay, all right. Let's jump on then to the hub. So just talk us through why in the beginning. So as I was saying at the very beginning, the Connected Mobilities Hub is an association that we set up over 4 years ago now. It sort of came out of the idea of getting together a series of companies to be invested in. Funnily enough, there were two people. I spoke to one of them last week that were the sort of the catalyst for this. One of them was Scott Lyons from Ford, because I asked him how many people to go to an event in southern Spain, how many decent quality smart mobility or connected mobility at the time we called them startups would he need to be present at the same day, and he said 5, and then a French girl from Asta Capital said 10, and so he's okay, well, how do we get together 5-10 startups, and that was where the association sort of formed. But why did you join? That explains why we set it up, and then we've gone from there to the open innovation and the networking and the communication and all the rest of it. But why did you join as Iomob?
Yeah, I mean, I remember reading something about the hub and going to the website, seeing the different startups that were part of the hub and the investors that have attended prior events. And it seemed like one of the only mobility ecosystem community organizations at least in Southern Europe. And, we are first and foremost a mobility company. We're a technology company, but mobility is the place we eat, live, and breathe. And being around a ecosystem of actors, public, private, investors, whatever, startups who are all in the same space it's kind of a no-brainer. Why wouldn't you want to be part of that if you're in the mobility ecosystem? And we're in Southern Europe, and this is a very your strong emphasis has been historically in Southern Europe. So good fit for us.
Okay, well, that's cool. Yeah, good to hear, because that's what we think, but it's often not the same. We're gonna, before I continue with that, I'm just going to jump to a question. So I'm going to put it up here on. You might have seen it already on your thing, but if you could. It's not really a question, it's more of a comment, but just give us your thoughts on.
Yeah, I mean, you unpack that question. There's a lot in that question around what kind of data, what's it used for, different types of mobility services, so mobility on demand, who needs that data, and how should the systems be governed. We just had a really interesting conversation with a European regional transportation agency. Largely the conversation was in line with what are we doing in Sweden, which is a really cool project. And this ties to this point. So the project we're doing in Sweden is we're aggregating the ecosystem of public and private services, like we've discussed. We use our algorithms. The public sector in Sweden has now embraced this new ticketing standard for mobile-based ticketing and payment called BOB. We integrate that. We offer this via an SDK, which is like a widget that gets plugged and played inside the transit authority's app. They're called Skåne Trafiken. We just announced, by the way, you mentioned Tier. We just announced yesterday, Tier and Voi are the first micromobility operators integrated into our micromobility bundle, but there are others coming. And we offer that to the city, but the city and Iomob agreed that we embrace an open MOS marketplace. So that means that private operators of MOS platforms should be able to also offer MOS experiences in their region. So it shouldn't be a walled garden monopoly owned and operated only by the public transit authority. So what we're doing there is also making this available, this SDK that gets plugged in to other MOS organizations. In Spain, we're talking to one, and around the world, we're talking to a couple who are interested in consuming that data so they can offer MOS. And then we can offer it to universities and other organizations. But the governance layer in all this is interesting, because this is what we advocate for in this open MOS model, which is that the local or regional transit authority should be able to impose some rules of the game of how MOS operators can play and how mobility services can operate and where their vehicles need to be parked. And all those rules can be baked into our core technology, which means if it's baked into ours, it becomes baked into anyone else who operates a MOS platform in that ecosystem. So we're allowing the transit authority to have primary governance of the ecosystem. And we are actually going to collaborate in the Sweden example with their innovation department to build some software tools so they can dynamically modify some of these rules of the game, including to the benefit of the private sector mobility ecosystem. So let me give you two quick examples. So if a city normally allows 1,000 vehicles to circulate for taxis and ride hailing on a normal day, they don't want more than 1,000 on any given day. But what happens if there's a tornado, a hurricane, a earthquake, a terrorist attack, the electricity goes out in the public transit system, there's a shock to the system. And maybe that shock to the system leads to an urgent need to get people out of danger. And that might mean, why should we keep this 1,000 vehicle limit? Why can't we let any legally operating taxi or ride hailing vehicle take people to safety no matter where they are, whether they're currently live or not? Let's make them live. So the model is, we can enable it with one click that they could automatically expose the 8,000 vehicles that are licensed to operate in that city. And those vehicles would then be instantaneously viewable, discoverable, bookable, and payable in any of the MOS apps that are connected to the platform. I have other examples like that around using it, this system for things like subsidizing alternative private services to public transit when public transit is down, or when there's not enough demand for sending a bus all the way 30 kilometers, so use private. Those are examples where you could dynamically manipulate the ecosystem, but in ways that benefit the private sector by giving them new business opportunities. So my point is, I think the governance, this is our view, that we should empower regional transit authorities and governments with the technologies and tools to govern an open mobility marketplace, that they should have the right to offer their own MOS experience to sell first and last mile to public transit, but that it should not be a monopolized walled garden, that instead there should be an open marketplace, and any company that wants to adhere to the rules of the game from the public sector should be given the right to operate, and that includes being given easy access to sell public transit ticketing inside their platform. And if I said before that companies like Iomob should have to give our data to public transit authorities, and private operators should be required to connect, open their data for aggregation, public sector should be required to open ticketing to third-party private aggregators, so that you have an open MOS marketplace and you don't monopolize it.
Well, that in a way is what you're doing with Renfe in Spain, isn't it? That on the multimodal mass app, your Renfe is the one promoting it, and the private operators are getting customers for free, in effect. I don't know if there's a percentage being paid in the background, but they're certainly not having to advertise to generate them.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Let's jump on. Now we're on the hub thing. So what value? So you've explained why you joined the hub, and I'm very pleased to hear that. What value have you got out of it? I mean, what value does it add to you? You've talked about the networking, being in a common a space with people with common philosophy, common industry, whatever. But what is there any specific value that you got out of it that you feel like sharing?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably like almost every entrepreneur, I was maybe more initially drawn to the access to investors, and it turns out, while that's been useful, I think what's even been more useful is being part of the startup mobility ecosystem that's there, and just having a network of other startups that are in different stages of their evolution, but they're all, in our vertical in some way or another. They're all operating in mobility, and they have shared pains and shared opportunities. And we have this WhatsApp group, which, some WhatsApp groups are useless or they're frustrating because you get spammed a lot. But the WhatsApp group is really useful because people are sharing news. They're sharing new calls for proposals, new funding opportunities. And it's a community that seems to not be very selfish in terms of when there's new calls for solutions, and maybe you have a solution that can respond to that call, you might be smart to not share it with the community so that there's fewer competitors. But that's not how the Connected Mobility Hub ecosystem seems to work. Everyone seems to be kind of in it to help the whole community grow. And probably if someone else gets it, you weren't going to get it anyway, and so it's okay. It's and what goes around comes around. If you don't get it this time, maybe someone shares something you'll get. So it's been really interesting because you get real-time information about what's happening, trends, new funds that are being launched to focus on mobility. We share news about each other, about our successes, and then we amplify that news in social media and everything. So it feels like a virtuous circle of support amongst the ecosystem. And of course, you and Sergio and other people from the hub do a good job of creating the glue for the community and then hosting all these events, webinars and some in-person events. We collaborated on an event in Barcelona when we were being innovative and right when COVID came and we didn't have our 4 years from now, and we created our own little mobility event in Barcelona. So yeah, it's a good community for sure.
Yeah, okay. I mean that was one of the things that we wanted to be the case from the beginning. We wanted people, if they came on within the association, I think even in the sort of, it's not really a contract, but in the paperwork that you sign, it specifically says, you have to come on in with the idea of sharing, because you say what comes around does, goes around, comes around, and and I think there's far more to be gained out of supporting each other than there is in, as you say, hiding away what's going on. I think one of the things, just a thought that sort of came to my head while you were saying it, one of the things that we haven't yet achieved, and I'd like to achieve, is that you see lots of companies in different countries, not so much with mass because there's maybe fewer of you, but there are lots of types of company that you see in different countries. It's the same company replicated in a different country, and I haven't yet seen much collaboration between those companies, because I think there's an opportunity there for mergers, for if not mergers, for joint ventures, for sharing customers. And I haven't, that I know of, no companies have actually done that, and I think that's something that we're missing. I don't quite know how to get it, because there's a lot of personality in startups and startup founders, but I do think there's an opportunity there.
I will say that we have had an ongoing dialogue about a collaboration with someone in our space that's in the ecosystem. The nice thing about Iomob in that regard is that we are B2B, and a lot of the players in Moss are B2C. And because we offer a middleware solution that can be offered to B2C Moss players, we're having conversations with B2C Moss players about they could basically license our backend algorithms and our integrations and our full experience, and then have a real quick deployment in a new market where they're not present and they don't have all the integrations and they don't have the algorithms. So we are having good conversations. I think it's easier to discuss collaborations when you're not targeting the same customer base with a similar solution. And in our case, because we're not going for the end user, it makes it easier for us to collaborate with companies that are targeting the end user.
Yeah. But still, if you're only focused on that, startups should be global. They should be looking to be global from day one, right? But lots of them, the reality of the situation is that they're not, and they focus on their local market or their national market. And so it'd be nice to see, I don't know, a French sustainable mobility company with, I don't know, let's say Decathlon as a client, or Leroy Merlin as a client that's in multiple countries, working with, hey, look, guys, you're in Italy. Well, look, I've got this customer. Let's put together a solution for them, rather than reinvent the wheel in different geographies. Let's try and collaborate. But I'm glad to hear that you're at least an example of where something something of that nature is happening. And I guess as time goes on, maybe more of this will happen. It's all trust really to start with, isn't it? But anyway, okay, jumping now on specifically to the investor event. So you were one of the startups at the 2019 investor event. So as you know, but I'll explain to the audience, the investor events to date, what we've done is we've done an afternoon and an evening of investor to investor networking. So the idea is investors introduce themselves to each other. They get to know each other, again, talking about sort of the trust issue, and have a feel for what their portfolios are, what their stages are, and what type of collaborations and co-investment opportunities there could be between each other. The next day, then the pitches happen, and then we have networking sessions and one-to-one meetings. And the reason for doing it that way is that you get the investor networking out of the system, the investors get it out of their system, so they 100% concentrate on the startups the next day. And because they've had these conversations about co-investment opportunities, in theory, the next day when they meet startups, they go, hey, look, these guys actually might be of interest to X that I was talking to yesterday. Well, then they give them a call post-event and perhaps they come into co-investment. Now, we've done that twice. We did that 1 year in Seville in 2018. In 2019, we did it in Malaga. This year, we were due to do it in Granada. Due to COVID, we're doing it all online. So if you could, you went through the experience in Malaga. If you could sort of talk us through how was your experience? I know Malaga wasn't as good as we'd hoped it would be. We were a bit unlucky actually in that respect, that we chose a weekend that was a bank holiday both in France and in Germany. And people didn't realize that at the beginning when they started signing up for the event. So there were a number of investors that were due to come that didn't. And I think we made a slight mistake as well, that we shouldn't have had it on the second day was on a Friday, and maybe we shouldn't have had it on a Friday. But in all that said, and you can only learn from your mistakes. You learn from your mistakes, not from your successes, right? So how was your experience? Was it positive? Was it negative? What were the positive parts? Let's focus on the positive. What were the positive parts? And why would you recommend, to be honest with you, why would you recommend an investor or a startup coming?
Well, I mean, on a personal note, obviously, if you're coming from outside of Spain, going to southern Spain in many parts of the year is a very nice place to visit. So it's a nice add-on. Unfortunately, this year it's remote, so you don't get that added benefit. But on the other hand, you can join from wherever. You don't have to travel. You can avoid social distance problems and access probably more startups and everything else. So I think that's probably a wash, I guess, on the pro and con of that. In terms of our experience, I think the things that I liked about it, first of all, as I mentioned before, around the hub, the whole thing is being around a whole group of mobility startups is fun for us, and I suspect for investors who care about mobility. And on that note, for all of you founders who've engaged with enough investors over the last year or two, I bet you found this out, and if you haven't yet, you will. It's really frustrating pitching a mobility company, especially one that's a little more complex, like ours is, to an investor who doesn't get or isn't passionate or focused on mobility in their portfolio. And I say that because it's really hard for them to understand the complexities of our business model, of the ecosystem, how it operates, why is our solution really needed, who the players are. Whereas if I mention, say, WIM and Moss Global to an investor who comes to the event of Connected Mobility Hub, I don't have to explain who WIM and Moss Global are. If you're in mobility, if you've invested in mobility, you understand what Moss is, you understand how hard it is for users to deal with the fragmentation problem. You know that Moss is really big. So basically, if you have a short window to pitch your company to an investor, like you would at an investor event like this, it's so much easier to skip all the introductory stuff and try to help them understand the importance of your business model and go to what makes you different than your competitors and what your particular strategy is and how you're going to grow your business. That's the fun stuff to talk about, rather than repeating the why is the problem, what's the problem you're trying to solve. So I find that incredibly valuable. As a general rule, engaging with investors who are deeply engaged with mobility is way more useful for us. And that was, of course, the case there. I think the other nice thing there is you have a handful of strategic investors. And we're increasingly interested in working more with strategic investors sometimes than VCs. And that's because sometimes they can add more value than a VC. We're talking to some right now that they can get us exposure to new clients to grow our business in ways that a normal VC can't. They can help you get more funding sometimes for your follow-on round, but they're less likely usually to be able to help you accelerate the growth of your business, which is what in our stage of our company, we're focused more on getting more clients and growing our user base and everything else. So I think that combination of VCs who get mobility and strategic investors who are deep in mobility and looking for solutions to extend to their market, I think is a really valuable thing. And then again, I'll reiterate that being around other founders who are also in mobility and engaging with them in the interim, not just with investors, and hearing their pitches as well. You sometimes get ideas for your own pitch, how to prove your own. And also just, being appreciative of all the founders around Southern Europe that are trying to tackle mobility challenges in innovative ways. So those would be the key takeaways for me. Okay,
fantastic. I mean, that's really good to hear as well, because I do remember from the first investor event we did, we had about, I think there were 55 different funds or something. And I very clearly remember a conversation about one of the specific startups, and there were two financial investors and myself, and they were saying, yeah, but I don't know if the OEMs will find that interesting or not. And I turned around, there was a guy from Renault standing right behind me that had come from Paris, and I tapped him on the shoulder and said, look, would you mind joining this conversation, because I think it'd be really interesting to the guys to hear your feedback. And he gave them feedback. He said, no, we were actually really interested in it. And as a result of that conversation, I think two of them actually ended up investing, because it just cleared up their concerns. I mean, they took time.
Of course,
it wasn't immediate,
but it helped accelerate.
Yeah, certainly, because it's validation on a commercial and strategic level that with a depth of understanding that a financial VC is just not going to have, because it's not their day-to-day. It doesn't matter how intelligent they are. It's not something that they do day in, day out, year after year. And for a strategic industrial investor, it is. All right, so I'll jump to the last question, because we've gone to we're on 42 minutes now. So this one's for you really, and for me to learn from it, and maybe if any investor sees this, for them to learn. So, what right now for Iomob would be your perfect investor? You spoke about strategic investors, and maybe it's a strategic investor, if so, of what kind? But who would be your perfect investor, and why?
Well, yeah. I mean, certainly I've thought about that a lot, and I've engaged with a lot of investors over the last couple of years. So I think it's an investor that brings smart money. I mean, that's an overused term, but we really do value. A lot of young entrepreneurs think that money is money, and money is not money. 120 euro is different than 20 euros. If it comes from you, you're deep in mobility, or it comes from somebody I just run on the street who wants to invest 20 euro. Which one's more useful to me? Obviously, your money is. Why? Because you're tapped into a whole ecosystem who can help me with investment, who understands my business, who might make connections to me to a partner. So as a general, smart money, and for us, what I mean smart money for Iomob is someone who gets Moss, someone who has a strategic interest in Moss, and someone who can help us scale our business, not just from an advisory perspective on a board meeting once every 3 months, but somebody who can actually, I don't mean we need them to dive deep and have somebody assigned to work with us 10 hours a week, but it's someone who has an organization who has a vested interest in our success beyond the return on investment, that they believe they'll get more return on their investment by helping us succeed and get traction, because there's synergy between us getting growing and something else of theirs growing. It could be a VC, but it would be a VC that has a portfolio where they see value in having Iomob as part of it. We brought up Tier a few times. There's a lot of companies VCs that have invested in Tier. We're partnered with Tier. So that's an example of a VC that has a portfolio of micromobility operators or other organizations that go to the point you made earlier about the value of startups collaborating if they want to be global. Well, we have very big global ambitions. We're going to need to partner with the whole mobility ecosystem. So it could be a VC with a very strong vertical focus on mobility and a lot of their portfolio companies where there's synergy between us and them. And so the VC would help ensure that synergy is achieved. Or a strategic VC who has a direct business relationship to what we do and can help us extend our reach and get access to new customers, public or private. That would be primarily our sweet spot. And I think, a lot of startup founders feel this way, but, we've been raising money for a while off and on for a couple of years now. And it would be great to have someone who, if things keep going well, would be a follow-on investor as well. Not just help connect us to follow-on money, but actually want to lead or at least participate in another round in an active way so that it can alleviate some of the time I spend as CEO of Iomob fundraising so I can spend more of my time executing, which is what the investors want us to do anyway.
Yeah, well, that's what founders want to do. All the shareholders want to happen really on a daily basis. Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, thank you very much, Boyd. I think that's been really useful. I've loved the stuff you say about the hub. So I want them to cut them up and post just those comments, because otherwise it's going to get lost in the 46 minutes that we've been talking. But thank you very much. That was really useful. I think startup founders will find it very useful. I think investors, if they're not interested in Iomob and they are interested in mass, then they should certainly talk to you, because as I say, I mean, the kind of thing you're doing, I think is huge potential, huge potential. It's almost unlimited. And for those people that are watching still or that watch later on, I'm doing another one for the hub, I think on Friday or Thursday or Friday. I'll put it in the comments to this post when I repost. And I've definitely got one with Enzo from Homie Hub that was also at the investor event last year for him to give us his feedback as well on terms of hub. And then we're here on the 8th, 15th, 22nd and 29th of July at 12 o'clock CET to do the pitching sessions, which hopefully people will find, I'm sure they'll find interesting. There's some really good startups. We've got to sort out your one. I've got Andrea on my and Bear on my back. You've got two allies there that are chasing me, and I just haven't had time to have a look at it. But thank you very much for the moment, and we'll see you very soon online, if not in person.
Thanks.
Cheers. See you, Boyd. Bye bye.